My name is Tom Faulkner. I'm head of assets and infrastructure here at Cornwall Insight. We focus on market intelligence and forecasting across the whole energy market. I focus particularly on low carbon generation and flexibility, which is very much what our topic of discussion is going to be this morning. I'm joined by Phil, Emilis and Thomas. So what I'll do to start with is maybe get each of you in that order to just introduce yourselves, who you work for and what you guys are focusing on at the moment. So Phil, let's start with you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Phil Thompson. I'm the CEO of Balance Power. We are a renewable and flexible energy project developer. We're focused on two things at the moment. We are developing renewable and flexible energy projects which are connected to the grid with a view to decarbonising and cutting the costs on our grid energy supplies. The second thing we're doing against the backdrop of grid connection delays and increasing costs is how do we connect these projects directly into large energy users so we still get to build our large energy projects as quickly as possible, but allow large energy users to benefit from behind the meter cost reductions.
Super. Emilis.
Thank you. Hi everyone. My name is Emilis Srage. I'm a product manager at Electron. So Electron, we're providing a flexibility market platform, which distribution system operators and transmission system operators use to procure flexibility and optimize these of their networks. We are based in the UK, and we're working with 3 UK DSOs at the moment. They use our platform to procure DSO flexibility services or run other types of markets as well. And we're also actively expanding into new geographies, so specifically continental Europe and North America, where we have already done successful trials. So yeah, that's me.
And Thomas.
Morning, my name's Tom Verghese. I work for Enersys. Enersys are a very large American-based battery manufacturer. We supply lead acid, predominantly batteries, but other chemistries as well, into globally and into various areas around the world. We certainly supply into the grid infrastructure, and we're a major part of the grid infrastructure into the DNOs in the UK.
Super. Thanks all. So as John has said, today we're going to be looking at renewable energy and grid reliability. And I thought it'd be good to start maybe with you, Phil, talking about the deployment of grid scale renewables. What are some of the key challenges you are facing at the moment, and what are Balance Power kind of doing to overcome that?
So yeah, as the guys have touched on earlier in this, the grid challenges are now a very, very known problem. There is a lot being done to address grid connection challenges. I think over the years, particularly I've been developing energy projects. When I first started developing energy projects and you were looking to try and find a grid connection, you could apply for that grid connection. It would probably be in the road very nearby. And it was almost an afterthought on where the grid connection would be. That then over time has evolved to you're going to need to go back to the substation to be able to achieve a grid connection. It's going to take a little bit longer. And then further in time, that as well, the substation is now full. It now needs more upstream reinforcement if you're going to connect a project. And then slowly but surely, we now can't connect anything anywhere. But those problems are now known, and the solutions are in the making to ensure we can connect those projects as quickly as possible. So we're actively working with DNOs and grid to work out how we can connect our projects quicker. I think for us on the grid's side of projects, where we're analysing the connections that we do have and connections that we're applying for, almost to try and work with the system operators to work out what is the best asset in that location and how can we deliver value and how can we deliver more volume to the network in the right places. So for us, there's a big focus on type of technology in specific locations that we can still connect in within a reasonable time frame. But then there is also the focus on how many megawatt hours is needed in a particular location, and not just to match our business models, but what aligns with a system requirement. So where can battery storage and renewables, where can they help reduce the need for reinforcement of the network, which may take a long period of time? The second side of what we're doing on the behind the meter side is a focus on big businesses are struggling with their energy costs. They're struggling to decarbonize. And they're also, whereas we're struggling to put power onto the network, these businesses are actually struggling to secure the additional power they need from the network to grow their businesses. So these renewable assets that we can build behind the meter offer that additional resilience. They can cut the costs of the businesses by avoiding the transmission and distribution charges, by avoiding other non-commodity costs. But what they actually do for the system is they reduce that stress on the system. So these are businesses that would normally need to expand their requirements from the grid. We can actually offer them that behind the meter. So it serves multiple purposes. We still get to build our projects quicker and in bigger number. But the businesses that we're connecting to are actually dealing with their energy problems on their side, and hopefully we're helping the entire system as well.
Super. Thanks, Phil. And Thomas, maybe I'll come to you next. I'm right in thinking that at Enersys, you guys are almost on the other end of that, looking at resilience of those substations, as Phil talked about.
Yeah, indeed. I think the substations and energy storage have kind of gone together for decades, if not centuries. We've been putting batteries as backup into substations for many years now. And certainly we're seeing some changes recently. I mean, specifically the requirements of the system now are, because everything relies on electricity, we're seeing an increase in autonomies, perhaps going from 24, 48 to backup times now of 120 hours plus. And that's driven by the fact that, we need this resilience. Our modern society needs this, but also that we're under more challenges now, through climate change, etc. One of the reasons why we're doing all of this is to reduce carbon, and that's because that's putting more and more stress not on the system, not just in the UK, which I think we could see, with the storms, etc., that we've had recently, but also changes worldwide, and that may be things like forest fires, where they're actually deliberately switching off the grid in some cases and going on to battery power. So effectively, what we're seeing is longer autonomies being required, longer backup times being required. That means fundamentally larger energy storage in terms of the kilowatt hours, and often in terms of the physical size of the batteries as well.
Super. Nice. Thanks, Thomas. And Emilis, you are almost bridging the gap here. Am I right in thinking that you're providing some of these a platform for these flexibility assets to access? Kind of looking at what role does flexibility have to play in this keeping the lights on, I suppose?
Yeah, that's right. I think, we don't have to overcome this challenge ourselves directly, but we do need to help our customers who are the system operators to overcome this. And yeah, for sure. I think, Phil summarized the kind of the challenges very well, I think. And, when we talk about solutions, I think it's quite straightforward, really. At the end of, it's straightforward at a high level, right? So it's easy to say, oh, we can upgrade the network. We have two options. We can upgrade the network, or we can use existing network more efficiently. So that sort of is very straightforward. But the problem is that, when it comes to network upgrades, and I mean, my view is that they're obviously needed and they will happen anyway, but we can't rely on them alone because, I mean, they're expensive and they also take time. And this is where flexibility and flexibility market platforms come into the picture. So, we've always advocated for, there are several things we can do, obviously, and, bringing generation closer to demand or vice versa is one option. Another option is to use locational price signals that would incentivize the use of electricity at the right place and at the right time as well. So that's where we come from. And this is what we help our kind of customers to do.
That's great. Thanks so much. I suppose, Phil, were you going to jump in this? Sorry if I cut you off.
I was just going to say the grid upgrades. It gets talked about as though it's very straightforward, and this is where I think the wider solutions that the guys are talking about here are so important, because to be able to do those upgrades, even just securing the land rights to be able to do that, to be able to work with the landowners, to be able to put the miles and miles of new cables through the country. That's a problem securing the land rights. Then it's going to be even if you can do that, you're going to have a problem securing the planning permissions to be able to do it. And that is not to say that there aren't abilities there within with the rights that National Grid have to be able to do this. But it is going to be a battle with communities to do this. So where we can reduce the strain on communities and to reduce that requirement, it's going to shorten the timescales and reduce the pain. We only have to look at how difficult it has been to put HS2 in place, which is effectively a single line through our country, and we can't even do that very quickly. This is hundreds of thousands of lines crisscrossing the country with substations, which are going to be part of communities. It's going to be challenging to do it. We need to think of the ways that we can make this less painful for the communities that these projects are eventually going to serve.
I think that's a critical issue. The existing system has by and large worked very well over the last few decades, but clearly is facing new challenges now. But we have to work within that existing system with minimum disruption, and that system can either be, in want of a better word, in the middle of nowhere and trying to help those communities. But we also have different challenges, for example, in the middle of cities, and trying to fit in a certain amount of storage and infrastructure in Knightsbridge or St John's Wood, etc. Your scope for bigger volumes is simply not there. So you have to work around the existing infrastructure as well. And it is also fundamentally quite the infrastructure side, and it was touched on the talks earlier, it's still quite a conservative industry. It's critical, it's national infrastructure, but you have to work around those areas such as cybersecurity, as well as and existing rules, as well as sort of trying to introduce new technologies, etc.
Good points. And maybe to come back to you, Emilis, are you seeing then that people are beginning to look quite favourably on flexibility and those storage solutions? Are you seeing that people are you really utilising those as an alternative option to just kind of building more grid?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, for sure. I think, flexibility is like, as a concept, it's not a new concept, right? I mean, grid and the system always relied on flexibility, but it was that flexibility was coming from gas and coal power plants that could turn up or turn down. And now, obviously, since we're moving away from fossil fuels and towards renewables are indispatchable. So flexibility is shifting away from the generation side to the demand side and storage, and I guess interconnectors as well, if we count them as flexibility. So it's always been an integral component of the system. But it's changing now. And I think another way of how it's changing is what it is used for, because historically it's been used to balance the system, but now it's also used to manage grid congestion. And this is where services like the DSO flexible services come in, and distribution network operators now are using flexibility to defer network reinforcement. So for sure, I think to answer your question directly, yes, definitely we're seeing that. I think flexibility has been changing, but obviously now there are other questions now. So what do we do? How do we scale it, basically, and those questions that we need to address.
Yeah, I wonder if anyone else wants to come in there on the scaling up, both in terms of long duration storage, but also being able to do this at kind of wider scale. Any thoughts on that, Thomas?
Yeah, I think the point is it comes down to the number of gigawatt hours of storage that we have is critical to address this resilience point. That at the moment, the business models for energy storage are limited to probably 2 hours, but there needs to be probably more interaction with government and the system to be able to say, well, how can maybe installing more gigawatt hours at a certain point reduce that need for the system upgrades. That conversation sort of at the moment, hasn't been opened up at present to say, how many hours do we need in a given location? And even though the business case isn't there right now to do it, how would, the system sort of subsidize those batteries to make that happen, to reduce and put the timescales on delivering, a net zero system quickly?
Yeah, and I think there are other issues around that in terms of, as we touched on earlier, space, planning permission, and if the technology actually, is currently available, both in terms of, does it exist, and also demands elsewhere for these large energy storage, because globally we're all facing these challenges, and I think it's for me it's about having an idea of where we want to go. Adding energy storage is a must for the grid, but it's how we go about doing it, not just over the next 10, 20 years, but over the next two to 5 years as well, and meeting the immediate requirements that we're going to see in terms of balancing out the grid and the demands.
Yeah, I agree. I think, on this gigawatt versus gigawatt hour debate, I think, in reality, assets don't really need grid access 24 hours a day. And we know that, DNOs are already looking into this, and, they're slowly, introducing and rolling out timed connections. And they're also exploring new innovative market designs that would allow assets to share their network access. And we're actually involved in a couple of those innovation projects ourselves, which are very exciting. They're obviously still they're not BAU ready. And I guess it's not a problem that's very easy to solve, but for sure, I think, it's clear that if, assets don't need their connection 24 hours a day, there are probably ways of utilizing those connections more efficiently.
Yeah, it does go back to somebody touched on the coal-fired power stations earlier, and in many ways that wasn't a particularly efficient system, because you were paying for a large coal-fired station that would perhaps come online between 5 and 9 o'clock in the evening, which isn't the best way of using your resource. And I would certainly agree that there are other ways of managing those peak demands at the end user level, through peak shaving, through commercial pushes to reduce demand at certain points, rather than sort of having an infrastructure in there that basically is only used to back up the system on an occasional basis.
Super. I suppose we've touched a lot on the fact that there's a need for flexibility, and I think everyone's agreed that the need for deployment of storage and flexibility and the number of gigawatt hours is important. I suppose to all of you, do you think that the current incentives to utilize flexibility, to deploy flexibility are correct? Are they leading us to a more reliable grid? Is there more that needs to be done to overcome some of these challenges? I suppose there's quite a lot to unpick there. So happy to take thoughts on that.
I'll go first, but yeah. So I think it could be improved. I think that I would say that would be my statement. Certainly, when we look at the large end users of electricity, they're very focused, particularly these days, on reducing their bills. We even have a factory in the UK, and we're certainly very focused on reducing our bill over the last couple of years. So at a local level, you aim to reduce your electricity use. Clearly, that's also on a time basis, so you're aiming to reduce at certain periods of time. So there is a commercial incentive there to reduce electricity use. I don't think that's perhaps enough, and we're moving quickly enough. And we can unpick the reasons for that in terms of what is currently available, to put in. But I think, there's a push there, but it's not being done quick enough.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think for us, obviously, there's the overall that the communication probably out of grid and government is not weighted enough to fixing the problem. We see it on the behind the meter offering that we have at the moment, that businesses almost would rank a behind the meter renewable generation project exactly the same as buying a power from a renewable asset 200 miles away under a VPPA arrangement. And they're saying this is the same. I don't know what the incentive is apart from price to buy power behind the meter than buying power from a renewable project that's from the grid 200 miles away. There needs to be this differentiation, which can be done quite easy to say what you should try and do first as a business is build the biggest renewable behind the meter. It is going to help cut your costs. It's going to improve your competitiveness, and it's going to give you additional resilience that you need in a changing system. The next best thing that you can do is sign a VPPA. If you can't do that, or you've maximized that opportunity, move on to the next one. That's the VPPA, sign with a renewable asset somewhere else. That's your next best option. You'll still save some money. You will improve there. Then move on from there with it. But I think more should be done to highlight, particularly for businesses. These are the businesses that are, consuming more power all the time. We want to make UK businesses, or the system wants to make UK businesses more competitive. They want to know that they can rely on the system that's built for them. But government can do a very, it's a very easy, rather than paying for all these system upgrades and dealing with the battle. They can actually do this very easy just by categorizing and giving businesses the guidance on what they should be doing, what are the best options, what's the cleanest, what's the cheapest, and letting businesses then choose from them options and do the maximum that they can in each of the buckets.
I think there is a move to associate goods and services with a certain amount of carbon produced or associated with those goods and services. And I think that will gradually lead to, particularly some of the large users of electricity, and an example here would be data centers, to perhaps change the way that they use their electricity, both more efficiently in terms of fundamentally less use of electricity, but also to question where that energy resource comes from. So a move towards less carbon associated with each kilowatt hour that those end users use. That's being driven, I would suggest, at a sort of regional level, at a European level at the moment, but we're certainly beginning to see that now in that sector.
I mean, I think I agree with everything that was said. I think so from our perspective, what we're seeing now is that, if we think about, the important thing is that those assets have a route to market, so a way to provide flexibility and get paid for it. And obviously there are different, there are different ways of doing that. But if we look at the market today, we have DSO flexible services, we have the demand flexibility service, we have the P415 code modification that allows aggregators to sell flex into the wholesale market. We obviously have NGSO markets too. So there are a few different markets out there. But I think the big question now is sort of how do we scale volumes and value? Do they go together? And, there are a couple of interesting, wider industry initiatives happening right now. So, if we look at, for example, Energy Networks Association, which is this organization that unites all UK DNOs, they're working on standardizing a lot of the flexibility procurement process to make user experience better and easier. If we look at Ofgem's the Future of Distributed Flexibility initiative, they're looking at creating the common digital infrastructure that is needed to scale flexibility. So they do a lot of work on that too. Then we have DESNA's Flex Markets Unlocked program, which is looking at tools that can facilitate system-wide coordination, enable things like revenue stacking, and then also standardization across many markets. So there's a lot going on. I think when we speak to service providers and also market operators, it's interesting to see and compare their pain points. So, when we speak to flex service providers, they all say that, we need a better user experience because currently participating across different markets is not easy. You have to register provide different information when you register. It's time consuming, etc. So that's a clear pain point. At the same time, we know that service providers would like to trade flexibility near real time, so day ahead or week ahead. And that is interesting because when we speak to network operators, they are saying that they would like to do that too. So then the question is, why can't we move there fast enough? And there the problem is that with network operators, they could move, or they would like to move to near real-time flex procurement, but to do that, they need certainty that they can procure flexibility, they can procure the flex volume that they need. And that means that markets need to have enough liquidity in them. So it's a really interesting challenge because, clearly both sides want the same thing. It's just how do we get there? Somebody, I guess, needs to take like a leap of faith, basically. But it's interesting that. So I think, for sure, the question now is how do we sort of get from where we are to the place where flexible assets are paid for providing the service in the right place and at the right time. So that sort of is, what we're thinking about really hard.
Yeah, no, they're all really good points. We've kind of got a few questions on lots of what you guys have been talking about. So I think it's a good topic to stay on and maybe elaborate with. Phil, maybe us start with you on this one. Someone's asked, do you think the government has a responsibility to incentivize behind the meter solutions for businesses? And if so, what do you think that should look like?
I don't think they need to incentivize businesses as such. The price is incentive enough for the businesses that we're dealing with to choose to implement a behind the meter solution. I think the issue for businesses is they are trying to cut costs and they're trying to decarbonize. And on the decarbonisation point of view, the government just need to be a little bit more clearer with people what is the best option and what means a business is picking the greenest, cleanest option. And that is not to say that they need to say that VPPAs or sleeved power is any worse. They just need to create very clear parameters for businesses to say, please do as much as this one as you can first. That this is the cleanest and this is probably going to save you the most money, followed by the next solution. So I don't think there needs to be any more. The incentives are there for the businesses on a cost point of view. The projects we're doing, we can generally get pricing, final delivered price between 10 and 15 pence a kilowatt on the majority of the projects that we're doing, which is cutting the costs of these businesses. So the money side of it works. The problem is on a behind the meter solution. If these businesses are consuming power 24/7, fairly baseload, a renewable asset is only going to generate probably 25% of your annual needs. That is then versus, so a business will look at what we can offer, which is a maximum, best sized renewable against a VPPA that can probably do 100%. But they think the 100% and the 25% are the same thing, when really we think businesses should be being told by government, do this solution 25% of the time. That's the best one and it's the cleanest. Fill the other buckets with the other 75% with a VPPA or an arrangement, which again will save you money, but it's not quite as clean and cost effective as the other solution. So I don't think it's an incentive that needs to be done. It just needs to be a clearer messaging about what businesses should be doing.
Super.
Interesting point that as well. Sorry, because I think it's, to get back to my point about the carbon associated with the goods or the service, doesn't really make a differentiation there between what Phil said and maybe through record legislation or standards that difference in terms of the carbon associated needs to be clearer.
Yeah, and just to maybe stay with you for a minute, Thomas, someone's asked a little bit about how the role of data centers might play in balancing grid and interactivity. I know that it's an area you're kind of working in at the moment.
Yes.
Do you think you could elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, so data centers is clearly a rapidly growing market. It will, in terms of energy use, and even within this country, certainly the expectation is it will grow rapidly again, particularly with the rise in AI. And data centers are currently being challenged to reduce the amount of energy they use rather, while also getting bigger and bigger and using more and more electricity. So they're trying to be more efficient, certainly, but they're getting bigger and bigger. In terms of what they they will be increasingly be challenged at a regional level to reduce that carbon. These sort of fixed assets are going to come under scrutiny from certainly the EU and local governments to reduce those electricity. And you don't see it in the UK, but certainly in Ireland, for example, there's a lot of pushback against new builds of data centers because of the stress that they're putting on the grid. The data centers themselves are well aware of this. They're very keen on reducing their power as and when heat, etc. Reuse of heat is certainly something that they're very keen on. Yeah, and it's certainly something coming in, but they will become more efficient. I've got no doubt about that, but they are getting bigger, and I think that's one of the problems that we have. My personal view is they should also become more efficient internally in terms of how we write the software to store all of this. The answer to storage of data is just to build a bigger data center. And at some point, that's going to hit a ceiling, if you like. So yeah, they're becoming more efficient. They're certainly reporting on their carbon use. We, as a major supplier of energy storage into data centers, we're going to have to start to, for example, publish the amount of carbon our batteries use while in the data center, the amount of carbon associated with the manufacture of the products. All of that's going to be across the board in data centers. They're becoming more efficient, but they're definitely going to become bigger.
Super. Thanks, Thomas. I'm going to try and do a smoothish segue into this next question for you, Emilis. I suppose with bigger data centers comes more demand, and increasing demand on the system, whether from something like a data center or even from electric vehicles, heat pumps, and the like. I had a question surrounding kind of vulnerability of the kind of wider DNO networks, and whether the flexibility services that the DSOs are procuring is to avoid vulnerability, or is it a kind of mixture of that and also providing services to the wider network? Just kind of expanding on that.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great question, and I think I think when we talk about DSO flexibility services specifically, when DSOs are so basically when DSOs, the reason why DSOs are using these services is because they're going through a process which is called the distribution network options assessment process, which basically is a process in which DSOs identify areas that need reinforcement. They estimate the cost of that reinforcement, and then they turn to flexibility markets to see if they can procure flexibility for cheaper than what the reinforcement would cost. And if they can, they'll use flexibility. If they can't, they will upgrade the network. So I think the short answer definitely is yes, because obviously, I think at the end of the day, what's important is that this energy transition happens at the lowest cost for consumers, and flexibility can be in some places cheaper than reinforcing the network. I think especially when we think about certain locations where that additional grid capacity is only needed for a couple of hours a day. So in that case, flexibility does make a lot of sense, because it actually is much cheaper to procure a service for a couple of hours a day than reinforcing the whole network. So I think as long as we are doing that, so looking at cost and deciding what's cheapest and best, I think the answer is yes, it could be.
Great stuff. Thank you. And I think that answers a little bit of one of our other questions, which is, do you think that flexibility is just the the solution for not reinforcing the network? I suppose, as you've touched on there, Emilis, it's both, really, isn't it? It's a yes, it provides a really useful role where we can not have to reinforce the network, but there are some times where we do need grid enforcement, and that's just something that we're going to need to build out over time. I'm aware we're kind of 5 minutes away from the end of the session, and we had lots of good discussion. I suppose maybe if we finish off with a couple of minutes from each of you then on just let's look towards net zero. Let's look ahead to the future a little bit. In a net zero system, what signals are being sent? What does that look like from your point of view? And I'm aware it's a little bit of a crystal ball question, but helpful to understand what you guys think that the signals are that are being sent. What does the kind of mixture of flexibility versus kind of build out of network look like? If we maybe start with you, Phil, Emilis, and then Thomas, just some kind of final closing thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think probably there's a question here I have for Emilis in this, really, which is around the sort of the use of the interconnectors, and where use of interconnectors is almost disincentivizing build out of homegrown source of supply and resilience in all of this side. This is the probably point where I feel that needs to have an additional focus. I understand the requirements for interconnectors; they're very important parts. But in terms of their utilization for over and above our sort of homegrown resilience, and I feel like those should be used as a backup, and we should be building our own system and our own resilience, and not using, they're not an asset as such. We're relying on, another a different country's assets to provide us with something. So question to Emilis there on how you see that use of interconnectors.
No, I agree. I think, interconnectors don't really help to solve constraints on the distribution network, and especially when they're more locational, more granular. So I think, it's not like, it helps for sure, but like you said, it's in certain situations it makes a lot more sense to match demand and generation locally, and like behind the meter assets, for example, is a good solution to that. So I think it's definitely not a silver bullet, and like you said, agree. I think it's it's important that UK can do it within the country, for sure, because it doesn't solve the problem at the end of the day. So I mean, if the problem is, if we focus on the problem being the local constraints.
Thank you.
So I think from my perspective, I think if the question is about how would the system look, I think from our perspective, I guess we're looking at a system with a lot of flexible demand assets that can provide flexibility on short notice to help balance the grid and manage grid congestion. So that would be one, and I suppose we're moving towards that. But I would also say that it's also a system that is smart and digitalized, and where DSOs actually have good visibility of the LV network, which has been kind of a challenge now. And I guess that's quite important, because without good visibility, it's difficult to optimize the use of the network. And then the last point is that I already touched upon, but I think it's a cost-effective system as well, where we can meet net zero at the lowest cost for consumers. So and that probably means using our existing infrastructure better, not just building out more. So yeah, I think that would probably be the main things from my side.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think for me, it's about maintaining the resilience of the system that we've all become accustomed to. I think that's the overarching thing. Number one. Number two, I think it's going to be a mix in terms of energy storage, of large scale energy storage and smaller scale energy storage. Large scale being containerized energy solutions, small scale being what we're beginning to see at the moment of energy storage in people's houses, etc. I think thirdly, there's also the use of existing assets better, particularly for peak shaving. So that's battery backup in certain areas being used for certain amount of time, whether that be for fast frequency response or just laying off the grid at high demand periods. And I think finally, and I think it's been touched on by a couple of people, I think it's incentivization through lower cost, which we're beginning to see already, and also lower carbon production. And I think particularly larger end users will begin to be pushed that way, both in terms of, we want to see lower carbon use locally to yourselves. I think that'll all come in the next sort of 4 or 5 years. That's an existing trend, which I think will accelerate.
Super. Well, I think that brings us to 11:40 by my watch. So just to say thanks to all of you for joining me for a really useful discussion. I'm sure it's something we could have talked for a lot longer and across a lot and many different topics as well. But just to say thank you so much for joining me, and I hope it's been useful discussion for those on the line.